40,000 years. That is the time that separates a Hadzabe child from any other child on the planet. While boys from all over the world wake up for schools and screens, children of 6 or 7 years old in Tanzania awaken before the sun to track one of the most dangerous animals of the African savanna, the porcupine, an armored rodent with 35-centimeter quills capable of piercing the heart of a lion. And these children go looking for it inside burrows infested with black mambas. If you are passionate about wild animals and real documentaries, do not leave this video. Watch until the end, subscribe now to the channel, and comment where you are watching from. We are not talking about a game. We are not talking about a symbolic ritual. We are talking about real, raw survival, without a safety net. The Hadzabe are one of the last genuinely hunter-gatherer tribes on the planet. Between 1,200 and 1,300 people remain. Of these, only 300 to 350 still live exclusively off what the land offers. The rest were pushed to the margins of civilization, forced to beg for work, on farms or entertain tourists with demonstrations of a life they can no longer live fully. But in the most remote areas of Lake Eyasi, in northern Tanzania, the clock never moved forward. There, children still learn to make fire before learning to read. There, the ability to track an animal is worth more than any diploma. There, a 3-year-old boy already holds a small bow made especially for his hands, and at 7, he already participates in hunts that feed entire families. Lake Eyasi occupies a depression in the Great Rift Valley, covering approximately 1,050 square kilometers when the rains are generous. It sits at about 1,040 meters of altitude, surrounded by volcanic escarpments that rise like natural walls. During the dry season, the lake shrinks so much that it is possible to cross it on foot. During the rains, hippos arrive to cool off in its brackish waters, and flamingos cover the surface in pink. It is in this landscape of extreme contrasts that the Hadzabe built their existence. Their traditional lands are only 50 kilometers from Olduvai Gorge, the place that scientists call the cradle of humanity because of the quantity of hominid fossils found there. The proximity is no coincidence. The Hadzabe may be direct descendants of the first humans who walked through these savannas millions of years ago. Their genetics show no close kinship with any other people on the planet. Their language, Hadzane, is a linguistic isolate full of clicks that does not connect to any other known language. Think about the dimension of this. A human lineage that remained essentially unchanged while empires were born and fell, while religions spread across continents, while the Industrial Revolution transformed the world. The Hadzabe continued doing what they always did: hunting, gathering, surviving. Chapter 1. The Art of Hunting the Invisible. The day of a Hadzabe hunter begins before dawn. There is no alarm clock. The body simply knows. Studies conducted by Duke University revealed that the Hadzabe sleep on average 9 hours per night, lying down around 10 p.m. and waking up around 7 in the morning. But the hunters wake up earlier. The best time to find fresh tracks is when the dew still marks the earth and nocturnal animals are returning to their burrows. Among the most valued animals is the African crested porcupine, a rodent that can weigh between 13 and 27 kilos, with a body length of 60 to 93 centimeters. To visualize, imagine a medium-sized dog, but covered by an armor of quills that can measure up to 35 centimeters in length. These quills are hollow at the tip and marked with alternating bands of black and white. When the animal feels threatened, it raises this crest in a display that makes it look twice as large. If the predator insists, the porcupine turns its back and charges in reverse, trying to drive the shorter and thicker quills into the attacker's face. How does a child face this? The answer lies in thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. The Hadzabe do not attack the porcupine in the open field. They corner it in its own home. The African porcupine is a nocturnal animal that spends the day sleeping in underground tunnel systems. These burrows can be up to 3 meters deep and have multiple escape entrances. The animal prefers to steal burrows dug by other animals, such as the aardvark, and then expand them for its own use. It is inside these burrows that the Hadzabe perform their riskiest hunts. The process begins with tracking. The hunters look for specific signs in the vegetation, characteristic footprints with 5 toes on the hind paws, claw marks in the dirt, feces in the shape of small capsules, well-defined trails that the porcupine uses repeatedly to go to and from its feeding areas. When they find an active burrow, the real work begins. Observe what happens next. An adult or a more experienced teenager approaches the main entrance and begins to dig with their hands and with wooden sticks. The goal is not to reach the animal immediately, it is to force it to reveal its position within the tunnel system. Meanwhile, other members of the group watch the secondary entrances. If the porcupine tries to flee through an alternative exit, it will be met by arrows or stick blows. Children participate in different ways, depending on their age. The youngest, from 3 to 5 years old, observe from a safe distance, absorbing every movement, every decision, every technique. There is no formal instruction. There is no moment when the father sits the son down and explains the theory of hunting. Learning happens through observation and gradual participation. Researchers call this immersion learning, and studies show that Hadzabe children learn mainly from each other, not from adults. At 6 or 7 years old, children can already take positions at the secondary entrances. They stay crouched in absolute silence, with their small bows ready. This task requires a combination of extreme patience and quick reflexes. The porcupine may take hours to decide to flee, or it may suddenly explode in a desperate run. Now dimension the real danger of this situation. Porcupine burrows in Tanzania do not only house porcupines. Black mambas, one of the most poisonous snakes in the world, frequently use these same tunnel systems as shelter. Their venom can kill an adult human in less than an hour if not treated, and there is no hospital in the Hadzabe lands. There is no antidote or walk away. A bite means almost certain death. In addition to snakes, the burrows are infested with ticks and fleas. Diseases transmitted by these parasites are a constant threat, and the porcupine's quills themselves, if they penetrate the skin, can cause serious infections. The tips are covered by microscopic scales that function like fishhooks, making removal extremely painful and difficult. Why then do the Hadzabe risk their children in this hunt? Because there is no alternative. Porcupine meat is one of the most reliable sources of protein during the dry season, when larger animals become scarce and the vegetation withers. The animal provides between 5 and 15 kilos of edible meat, enough to feed an entire camp of 20 to 30 people for one meal. And more importantly, teaching a child to hunt is not a choice. It is the only way to guarantee they survive when they become an adult. The bows used by the Hadzabe are works of engineering refined by millennia of experimentation. They select wood from a specific tree called mutateko, shaping each bow by hand until its curvature corresponds exactly to the length of the archer's arm. The arrows are even more sophisticated. The tip is usually made of metal, obtained through trades with the neighboring Datoga tribe, who are traditional blacksmiths. But the real secret lies in the poison. The Hadzabe produce a black and sticky paste by boiling the sap of a plant called Adenium bemianum, popularly known as the desert rose. This toxin, when it enters an animal's bloodstream, causes gradual paralysis over several hours. Hunters test the potency of the poison by tasting drops of the prey's blood. If the taste is bitter and burns the tongue, the poison is strong enough. Children learn to prepare this poison by observing their elders. They learn which plants to use, how long to boil, how to apply the right amount to the tip of the arrow. A mistake in this process could mean an ineffective arrow that only infuriates the prey, or an excessive dose that contaminates the meat and makes it dangerous for consumption. The porcupine hunt rarely ends quickly. It can take hours of patient excavation, interspersed with moments of absolute tension when the animal decides to move. When the porcupine is finally cornered in a section of the tunnel with no exit, the most experienced hunter needs to make a crucial decision. Use a long spear to kill it from a safe distance, risking damaging too much meat, or get close enough for a precise blow, risking a defensive charge from the animal. Lions have already died pierced by porcupine quills, leopards, hyenas. The scientific record documents cases of humans who succumbed to infections caused by quills that penetrated vital organs. Each hunt is a risk calculation that these children learn to make instinctively, without ever having heard of probability or statistics. When the hunt is successful, something extraordinary happens. Silence. For a moment, everyone stops. The danger has passed. Food is guaranteed. Then the group works together to extract the animal from the burrow, remove the quills carefully, and prepare the transport back to the camp. If the animal is too heavy to carry, the entire camp moves to the site of the hunt. The Hadzabe are nomads. Their houses are temporary structures of branches and bushes that can be built in hours and abandoned without remorse. The meat never belongs to the hunter who delivered the final blow. It belongs to everyone. This is a fundamental principle of Hadzabe society that no child needs to learn formally, because it is present in every meal, in every distribution, in every moment of community life. Greed does not exist among the Hadzabe. There is no word in Hadzabe for individual possession of food. Food is found, food is shared, food disappears, and tomorrow the cycle begins again. Chapter 2. The Price of Freedom. The life of a Hadzabe child is not romanticized by the Hadzabe themselves. They do not see themselves as guardians of an idyllic past. They simply live in the only way they know, and that they choose to continue knowing. But the numbers tell a story that needs to be heard. The average life expectancy among the Hadzabe revolves around 40 years. This does not mean that adults die at 40. It means that infant mortality is devastatingly high, pulling the average down. Children die from diseases that would be easily treatable in any hospital. They die from hunting accidents. They die of hunger in particularly difficult years. Those who survive to adulthood frequently live long and healthy lives, with extraordinarily resistant immune systems and practically no incidence of modern chronic diseases such as diabetes, obesity, or heart disease. Researchers discovered that the gut microbiota of the Hadzabe is one of the most diverse ever recorded in human populations. This bacterial diversity, shaped by a completely wild diet and by constant exposure to the natural environment, offers protection against inflammation and autoimmune diseases that afflict industrialized societies. Studies showed that just 3 days following a diet similar to that of the Hadzabe can increase intestinal bacterial diversity by up to 20%. But this scientific knowledge does not protect the Hadzabe from the most persistent threat they face, the loss of territory. In the last 50 years, the Hadzabe have lost up to 90% of their ancestral lands. Iraq W farmers advanced from the north, transforming hunting lands into onion plantations. The Mangola region became the main onion-producing center of East Africa, but this agricultural progress came at the expense of the savanna that sustained the Hadzabe. From the southeast, Datuga herders brought their herds of goats and cattle, clearing native vegetation to create pastures, drying up the small bodies of water that the Hadzabe used, and hunting wild animals to local extinction. What remains for the Hadzabe are fragments of their original territory, small pockets of savanna surrounded by farms and villages. Each year, these pockets shrink a little more. Each year, the pressure to abandon the traditional way of life increases. Consider the irony of this situation. The Hadzabe have lived in the same region for at least 10,000 years, possibly much longer. They never built fences, they never declared ownership, they never signed documents. And now they are treated as invaders in their own land because they do not have papers to prove what should be obvious to any honest observer. The government of Tanzania tried 3 times to force the Hadzabe to settle in permanent villages and adopt agriculture. The first attempt was in 1927, during British colonial rule. The second in 1939, both failed. The Hadzabe simply waited until the provisions provided by the government ran out and then returned to the savannah. The third attempt was the most brutal. In 1965, already under independent Tanzanian government, the Hadzabe were rounded up under armed escort and forced to live in a settlement where missionaries had built a school and a hospital. The intention was to civilize them. The result was catastrophic. confined in small spaces for the first time in their lives, without immunity to common respiratory diseases, the Hadzabe were devastated by epidemics of measles and lung infections. Many died, especially children. The survivors fled back to the savannah as soon as they had the opportunity. The settlement was abandoned. The experience left deep scars in the collective memory of the people. Since then, no large-scale effort has been made to force settlement, but the pressure continues in other forms. Hadzabe lands in the west were transformed into a private hunting reserve, where the Hadzabe are officially prohibited from hunting. Missionary schools continue trying to attract children with promises of education, separating them from their families for months or years. The Hadzan language, although still naturally taught to children, is classified by UNESCO as vulnerable because its use is increasingly restricted to the domestic environment. And yet, the Hadzabe persist. 300 people still wake up before the sun to hunt. They still manufacture their bows with mutateco wood. They still prepare adenium poison. They still teach their children to track porcupines, to identify edible plants, to make fire with the friction of sticks. They still share every piece of meat equally among all the families in the camp. The Epim dance still happens on new moon nights. The men represent scenes of past hunts through movements that tell stories without words. The women participate with complementary roles, and the entire community reinforces the bonds that keep them united. The Maitoko ceremony still marks the passage of girls to maturity. The elders still tell stories around the fire about the 4 eras of Hadzabe history, from the hairy giants of the beginning of time to the current people. For Hadzabe children, there is no distinction between playing and learning, between work and life. Researchers observed that boys frequently build small camps next to the adult camps, where they imitate all the activities they saw the elders perform. They hunt butterflies with their small bows and deliver them to the girls, who pretend to cook them over imaginary fires. This play food is then shared following exactly the same conventions of division used by the adults. Without realizing it, the children are internalizing the fundamental values of their culture: generosity, cooperation, patience, attention to the details of the environment, the ability to read the land as others read books. The Hadzabe do not believe that adults should tell children what to do. Researchers who studied their child-rearing practices discovered that Hadzabe parents see children as responsible for their own education. Interfering too much, they believe, can prevent the child from learning other equally important skills. This autonomy does not mean neglect. Parents are always aware of where their children are and what they are doing. But they rarely intervene unless there is real danger. The result is a childhood that would seem strange to Western observers: 2-year-olds playing near fires without constant supervision, 5-year-olds handling sharp knives to help prepare food, 7-year-olds participating in potentially deadly porcupine hunts. And yet, studies show that this approach produces adults who are extraordinarily competent, flexible, and capable of solving problems collaboratively. Perhaps there is something that the modern world has forgotten and that the Hadzabe never lost. The Hadzabe diet varies dramatically with the seasons. During the dry season, from May to October, hunting becomes more productive because the scarce vegetation concentrates animals around the few remaining water sources. Porcupines, baboons, dik-diks, hyraxes, mongooses, and occasionally larger prey like zebras and impalas provide the necessary protein. The internal organs, especially the liver and heart, are roasted immediately and consumed by the hunters as a reward for the effort and as a concentrated source of nutrients. During the rainy season, from November to April, the diet changes to fruits, berries, and honey. Honey is perhaps the food most valued by the Hadzabe, surpassing even meat in preference. They know 7 different species of wild bees and know exactly where and when each one produces honey. Boys begin to learn honey collection at 5 or 6 years old, climbing gigantic baobabs to reach hives that can be dozens of meters off the ground. Baobabs are central to Hadzabe existence. These monumental trees, some thousands of years old, provide fruits rich in vitamin C, nutritious seeds, and shelter for the hives that produce the much-desired honey. The Hadzabe never cut down live baobabs. They never cut down any live tree. Their relationship with the forest is one of reciprocity, not extraction. Because of this, the savannas around Lake Eyasi remain healthy and biodiverse, even as forests around the world disappear. Hadzabe women are specialized gatherers who know more than 50 different edible plants. Using digging sticks made of hard wood, they locate tubers buried up to 50 centimeters deep. The process requires precise knowledge. They identify the correct plants by the leaves or vines on the surface, then tap the soil, listening for the hollow sound that indicates the presence of a tuber below. Extracting the tuber without breaking it requires refined technique, because a broken tuber means wasted food. These gathering skills provide the majority of the calories consumed by the Hadzabe, especially during periods when hunting is not productive. Children accompany mothers and grandmothers from an early age, first just observing, then helping to carry, and eventually gathering on their own. At 10 or 12 years old, a Hadzabe girl already possesses all the knowledge necessary to feed herself and a family. Hadzabe hunters spend on average only 3 to 4 hours per day on food-obtaining activities. This contradicts the popular image of primitive peoples working from dawn to dusk just to survive. In fact, bioenergetic studies revealed something surprising. Despite being much more physically active than people in industrialized societies, the Hadzabe spend approximately the same amount of calories per day. This exercise paradox, as researchers call it, suggests that the human body adapts to different levels of activity in more complex ways than imagined. The time not spent obtaining food is dedicated to rest, socialization, tool repair, and activities that strengthen community bonds. The Hadzabe do not know stress in the modern sense of the word. They have no deadlines, they have no bosses, they have no mortgages or bills to pay. Their society is radically egalitarian, without formal hierarchies or accumulation of wealth. Decisions are made by consensus, and the opinion of the most successful hunters carries weight, but no one has the authority to give orders to another. This social structure may seem fragile, but it proved to be extraordinarily resistant. While empires built on rigid hierarchies are born and collapse in a few centuries, the Hadzabe have persisted for millennia. Their resilience comes precisely from flexibility. When resources are depleted in one area, they move to another. When a member of the group becomes problematic, they simply join another group. When external pressures increase, they retreat to more remote areas and wait for the storm to pass. The question that hangs over all of this is inevitable. For how much longer will it still be possible? The remaining lands of the Hadzabe continue to shrink. New generations face temptations that their ancestors never knew. Cell phones appear even in remote camps, brought by tourists or acquired in trades. Some young Hadzabe experience life in the villages and decide not to return. Others return, realizing that the civilization that seemed so attractive from afar is much less satisfying up close. The Hadzabe, who still live traditionally, are not naive about the outside world. They know that hospitals exist. They know that schools exist. They know that supermarkets exist, where food is available without the risk of facing black mambas in porcupine burrows. And they choose consciously to continue living as they live, not out of ignorance but out of preference. This is perhaps the most important thing of all. The Hadzabe are not passive victims of history. They are active agents who have resisted decades of pressure to change and who continue choosing a different path. When missionaries offered schools, some Hadzabe sent their children and others refused, evaluating that the ability to make fire and hunt was more important than literacy in foreign languages. When governments offered permanent houses, the Hadzabe accepted the provisions and then returned to the savannah when the provisions ran out. When tourists arrived wanting to photograph the exotic, the Hadzabe charged for it and used the money to buy arrowheads from the Datoga blacksmiths. Pragmatism. That is perhaps the word that best describes the Hadzabe approach to life. They use what works and discard what does not work. If cell phones are useful, they use cell phones. If metal knives are better than stone knives, they use metal knives. But they never abandon the fundamental knowledge that kept them alive for 40,000 years. They never stop teaching their children to track, to hunt, to gather, to survive. The sun goes down over Lake Ayasi, as it has gone down for 40,000 years. A Hadzabe child returns to the camp with scratched hands, skin marked by thorns, and a smile that needs no translation. There are no trophies, there are no medals, just meat that will feed 25 mouths that night. Scientists from Duke University travel thousands of kilometers to study what these children already know in their blood. Researchers document techniques that no manual can teach. Anthropologists write theses on knowledge that passes from father to son without a single written word. But perhaps the greatest lesson is not in academic studies. It is in the question that Hadzabe existence places before us. What did we lose when we traded the land for asphalt, community for competition, the present for accumulation? 300 people. That is the number of Hadzabe who still live like their ancestors. 300 guardians of a knowledge that humanity took millennia to build and that can disappear in a single generation. Each child who learns to hunt a porcupine is not just guaranteeing dinner. They are keeping alive a library without books, a university without walls, a heritage that belongs to all of us.